The Crimson Empires reigned the golden throne of blood for 4,000 years. The Zephyrian Crimson Empire had painted the stars red with conquest. Their massive warships, each the size of small moons, drifted through space like metallic predators searching for their next meal. The Zephyrians themselves were living nightmares, 12 feet tall with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect plasma fire and razor-sharp claws that could tear through titanium hull plating like paper. Supreme, Apex Korthok sat upon his throne, carved from the bones of 1,000 conquered species. His empire stretched across 17 star systems, each one a monument to Zephyrian superiority. The throne room itself was a testament to their dominance, with walls lined with the skulls of alien leaders who had dared to resist. Bioluminescent fluid coursed through the crystal formations that grew from Korthok's spine, pulsing brighter when his predatory instincts were aroused. The Empire operated on a simple philosophy that had never failed them. They were apex predators, evolved on a world where only the strongest, most vicious creatures survived. Every other species in the galaxy was prey, existing only to serve Zephyrian needs or to be consumed entirely. They did not negotiate, they did not compromise, and they certainly did not show mercy. The hunting ground Swarmatron, Velrys, stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Blood Harvest, watching through the viewscreen as another civilization fell beneath. Zephyrian might. The Altarians had been a peaceful species, dedicated to art and philosophy. Their cities floated in the clouds of their gas-giant homeworld, beautiful crystalline structures that caught and reflected their twin suns in magnificent displays of light. Now those same cities burned as Zephyrian hunter-killer squadrons swept through them like locusts. The Altarians had tried to surrender within the first hour of the attack, broadcasting their submission on all frequencies. Valrus had ignored them completely. Surrender was for prey that might still have value. The Altarians were simply in the way of a more strategic target. Velrys herself was a perfect example of Zephyrian evolution. Standing 9 feet tall, her exoskeleton bore the scars of 100 battles, each mark a badge of honor. Her forearms moved independently as she coordinated the attack, her compound eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. She had personally led the conquest of 47 worlds, and each victory had only made her hungrier for the next. The destruction of the Altarian homeworld was routine, mechanical. Their defensive fleet had lasted exactly 17 minutes against Zephyrian superiority. Their ground forces had broken and run after the first orbital bombardment. It was almost disappointing. Velrys craved a real challenge, something that would test her skills as a hunter. She would get her wish sooner than expected. The forbidden, world deep in the archives of the Zephyrian Military Intelligence Division, ancient files gathered digital dust. Among them was survey report XK739, filed nearly 3,000 years ago by an exploration team that had discovered a world so hostile that even Zephyrian scouts had refused to land on its surface. Dr. Marcus Webb, a human xenobiologist, would have found these files fascinating if he had known they existed. Instead, he was busy studying the latest Zephyrian raids from his research station orbiting Jupiter. Webb had been tracking the Empire's expansion patterns for months, trying to predict where they would strike next. What he saw in the data terrified him. The Zephyrians were moving toward the Sol system with methodical precision, consuming every inhabited world in their path. Based on their current trajectory and typical hunting patterns, Webb calculated that Earth would be in their crosshairs within 18 months. On Earth, the news barely registered with most of the population. Humanity had been expanding rapidly. across the galaxy for the past 2 centuries, establishing colonies on hundreds of worlds. The idea that some alien empire could threaten all of human civilization seemed absurd to people who had grown up believing that humans were destined to inherit the stars. Captain Sarah Chen, coordinator of defense for the outer colonies, did not share that optimism. She had seen the after-action reports from worlds that had been hit by Zephyrian raids. The attacks were not random violence or even strategic conquests. They were systematic extermination campaigns designed to eliminate any potential competition. For galactic dominance, Chen had tried to warn Earth's colonial administration about the threat, but her reports were filed away with hundreds of other potential concerns that bureaucrats deemed unlikely to affect human expansion. After all, humanity had never encountered a truly hostile alien species. Every contact with alien life had resulted in either peaceful coexistence or human technological superiority, making conflict unnecessary. First blood. The Zephyrian advance scouts found the human colony of New Geneva 3 months ahead of Webb's predictions. The settlement was small, only 50,000 inhabitants, built around mining operations that extracted rare minerals from the asteroid belt surrounding a red dwarf star. It should have been an easy target, barely worth the effort. Of a full assault, Warmatron Velris decided to handle the operation personally. Intelligence reports suggested that the humans were a young species, barely 2 centuries into their space age. Their technology was primitive, their ships slow and lightly armed. The colony would serve as an excellent training exercise for her newest hunter-killer cadets. The attack began at dawn, local time. Zephyrian dropships descended through New Geneva's thin atmosphere like falling meteors, their hulls glowing red-hot from re-entry. The colonists had perhaps 10 minutes of warning from their orbital sensors before the first wave of Zephyrian warriors smashed through their defensive perimeter. What happened next would change the course of galactic history. The humans did not run. They did not surrender. They did not break under the overwhelming display of Zephyrian superiority. Instead, they fought back with a ferocity that stunned even veteran Zephyrian warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Captain Chen had arrived at New Geneva just 2 days before the attack, bringing with her a shipment of new defensive weapons and a small contingent of colonial marines. When the Zephyrian dropships appeared on sensors, she immediately implemented Emergency Protocol 7, a defensive strategy that no human commander had ever been forced to use in actual combat. The colonists, mostly miners and engineers, grabbed weapons they had never expected to fire in anger and took up positions throughout the settlement. They had trained for this scenario in mandatory civil defense drills, but no one had believed it would ever actually happen. Now, faced with 12-foot-tall alien predators armed with plasma weapons and natural armor that could stop rifle bullets, they discovered something about themselves that even they had not known. Humans, it turned out, were also predators. The impossible resistance, the first Zephyrian warrior to breach the colony's main habitat dome, expected to find terrified civilians huddling in corners, begging for mercy. Instead, he found a mining engineer named Rodriguez, waiting for him with a plasma cutter that had been jury-rigged into a weapon. The Zephyrian's natural armor could stop most projectile weapons, but it was not designed to handle industrial-grade plasma at point-blank range. Rodriguez died when the warrior's claws tore through his chest, but not before his improvised weapon had burned through the alien's exoskeleton and damaged the biological systems underneath. The Zephyrian warrior, severely wounded and confused by this unprecedented resistance, stumbled backward into a trap that the colonists had hastily assembled from mining explosives. Throughout the settlement, similar scenes played out as humans demonstrated a talent for improvisation and adaptation that no Zephyrian military manual had prepared their warriors to handle. Maintenance shafts became sniper nests, industrial equipment became weapons, civilian areas became killing fields, designed to channel attacking forces into prepared ambush points. War matron Valrus watched the battle unfold from her command ship with growing disbelief. Her warriors were the finest predators in the galaxy, trained from birth to hunt and kill any species they encountered. They had never been stopped by prey animals, let alone primitive ones armed with mining tools and improvised weapons. But the humans were not fighting like prey. They were fighting like cornered predators, using every advantage of terrain and technology they could improvise. When Zephyrian warriors breached the colony's power plant, they found the facility rigged with enough explosives to level half the settlement. The humans triggered the charges without hesitation, taking out an entire Zephyrian assault squad at the cost of their own lives and the colony's primary power source. The message, the battle for New Geneva, lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the colony was a smoking ruin, its population dead or missing, its infrastructure completely destroyed. By any reasonable military assessment, the Zephyrians had achieved victory. They had eliminated human presence from the system and demonstrated their overwhelming superiority, but Valrus had lost nearly 30% of her assault force. Casualties that should have been impossible against such a primitive enemy. Worse, the humans had managed to transmit a detailed record of the battle. 2 other human colonies throughout the sector before their communications array was destroyed. Asterisk. The transmission was brief and delivered in heavily accented English by someone who was clearly dying from severe injuries. But the message was clear enough to understand, and it would haunt Valrus for the rest of her life. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. New Geneva has fallen, but we took a lot of you bastards with us. This message is for any human who receives it. They can be killed. They're tough, but they're not invincible. They're just bullies who never faced anyone willing to fight back. Well, now they have. The transmission cut to static as the last intact section of the habitat dome collapsed, presumably crushing Chen beneath tons of twisted metal and debris. Valrus stared at the empty view screen for several minutes, processing what she had just witnessed. In 4,000 years of conquest, no prey species had ever inflicted such casualties on Zephyrian forces. More importantly, no prey species had ever transmitted intelligence about Zephyrian tactics and weaknesses to others of their kind. The humans had learned how to hurt Zephyrian warriors in a single battle and had immediately shared that knowledge with their entire species. For the first time in her military career, War Matron Valrus felt something she did not immediately recognize. It took her several hours to identify the emotion. It was fear. Asterisk. The Deathworld awakens the coalition, forms news of the New Geneva. Massacre spread through human space faster than the Zephyrian fleet could advance. Within weeks, every human colony, from the outer rim to the core worlds, had received detailed battle analysis, tactical recommendations, and emergency defense protocols. The colonial administration, suddenly faced with an existential threat they had never seriously considered, authorized the formation of the Terran Defense Coalition under Emergency Military Authority General Elena Basquis, a former Marine Corps officer who had been running security operations for the mining guilds, found herself appointed as Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces. She had never commanded more than a battalion in her military career. And now she was responsible for coordinating the defense of 300 human worlds against an empire that had never lost a war. Vasquez established her headquarters on Titan Station, a massive orbital facility that served as the hub for human expansion into the outer galaxy. From there, she began implementing a defense strategy that would have seemed impossible to any conventional military thinker. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian superiority with superior technology or numbers, humans would fight using the one advantage they possessed: their willingness to pay any price to survive. The first step was intelligence gathering. Every human ship, from massive cargo haulers to single-person exploration craft, was equipped with advanced sensor packages and tasked with monitoring Zephyrian fleet movements. Unlike other species that had faced the Empire, humans immediately began sharing information across their entire civilization, creating a real-time intelligence network that stretched across dozens of star systems. Commander Jackson Blake, captain of the destroyer Indomitable, was among the first to encounter a Zephyrian scout fleet using these new protocols. Instead of engaging the enemy directly, Blake's ship conducted a series of high-speed sensor passes that recorded detailed information about Zephyrian ship configurations, weapon systems, and tactical formations. The data Blake collected revealed something that no previous Severian victim had lived long enough to report. The Empire's ships were incredibly powerful, but they were also designed according to rigid doctrinal principles that had not changed in centuries. Zephyrian tactics relied on overwhelming superiority to break enemy resistance quickly and completely. They had never faced an enemy that could adapt and evolve their defensive strategies in real time. The Scorched Earth Protocol when the main Zephyrian fleet arrived at the human colony of Darwin's world. They expected to find another easy target. The planet was home to nearly 2 million humans and served as a major agricultural center for the surrounding sector. Intelligence reports suggested that the colonists had only basic defensive weapons and no military spacecraft capable of challenging Zephyrian superiority. War Matron Velrus, still commanding the advanced elements of the invasion fleet, approached Darwin's world with considerably more caution than she had shown at New Geneva. She deployed full reconnaissance squadrons and maintained defensive formations that could respond to unexpected resistance. Her previous encounter with humans had taught her that these particular prey animals had dangerous teeth. What she found waiting for her was something completely unprecedented in 4,000 years of Zephyrian conquest. The planet was empty, not destroyed, not conquered by another force, simply abandoned. 2 million humans had evacuated Darwin's world in the 6 weeks between the scout fleet's departure from New Geneva and the arrival of the main invasion force. They had taken with them every piece of useful technology, every weapon, every vehicle capable of space travel, and every scrap of food that could be transported. What they had left behind was a planet stripped of everything valuable, and seeded with enough booby traps to kill anyone foolish enough to land there. Industrial facilities had been rigged with explosives. Transportation networks had been sabotaged. The planetary communication grid had been infected with computer viruses designed to cripple any system that tried to interface with it. Most disturbing of all, the humans had left behind a message broadcast on all frequencies in perfect Zephyrian language. You wanted our world. Now you can have it. Enjoy the gift we left for you. The gift was a biological weapon engineered specifically to target Zephyrian physiology. Human scientists had analyzed tissue samples recovered from New Geneva and designed a synthetic virus that would attack the crystalline structures in Zephyrian exoskeletons. The virus was harmless to other species, but absolutely lethal to anyone with Zephyrian genetic markers. Velvrus lost 3 entire landing parties before her medical staff identified the threat and developed countermeasures. By then, the humans had broadcast detailed information about the virus throughout their colonial network, along with complete genetic data about Zephyrian biology and instructions for synthesizing additional biological weapons. The psychological War Supreme Apex Korthak received Velvrus's report from Darwin's world with growing rage. The humans were not fighting like any species the Empire had ever encountered. They were not trying to defend territory or preserve their civilization in recognizable form. Instead, they were waging a war of systematic denial, making every human world too costly to occupy and too dangerous to ignore. Worse, the humans were learning. Each engagement with Zephyrian forces yielded new intelligence that was immediately shared across their entire species. Their tactics evolved constantly, incorporating lessons learned from previous battles and adapting to counter Zephyrian advantages. It was like fighting an enemy that became stronger and smarter after every defeat. Korthok consulted his war council, seeking advice from military commanders who had overseen hundreds of successful conquests. Their recommendation was unanimous: increase the scale of attacks until human resistance collapsed under overwhelming force. The Empire had never encountered a problem that could not be solved by applying more violence. The next target was Kepler Station, a major human trade hub, located at the intersection of several important shipping routes. The Zephyrians committed an entire battle fleet to the assault, confident that no force the humans could assemble would be capable of meaningful resistance against such overwhelming firepower. Commander Blake, now promoted to Commodore and given command of the human defense fleet, had other ideas. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted only 6 hours, but it fundamentally changed the nature of the war. Blake's ships did not try to match Zephyrian firepower or engage in direct combat. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics designed to force the enemy into extended engagement while inflicting maximum psychological damage. Human ships would appear without warning, strike at Zephyrian formations with concentrated firepower, and then disappear before effective retaliation was possible. They used the station's asteroid field as cover, turning chunks of space rock into improvised weapons that could cripple Zephyrian vessels. Most importantly, they broadcast continuous propaganda directly into Zephyrian communication channels. The propaganda was devastating in its simplicity. Instead of threats or demands for surrender, the humans simply shared information. They broadcast casualty reports from previous battles, showing how many Zevorian warriors had died fighting humans. They shared intelligence about Zephyrian tactics and weaknesses. They played recordings of Zephyrian communications that had been intercepted and decoded, revealing the growing confusion and fear within the Empire's military ranks. The Empire cracks as the war dragged on. Something unprecedented began happening within Zephyrian society. For the first time in their recorded history, they began to question their own invincibility. Casualty reports from the human front were unlike anything. In their military experience, entire squadrons were being lost to an enemy that should have been crushed within days of first contact. Younger Zephyrians, raised on stories of easy conquest and inevitable victory, began to ask questions that their elders could not answer. Why were the humans so difficult to defeat? How had a primitive species developed such effective tactics so quickly? Most disturbing of all, why did human resistance seem to be getting stronger instead of weaker? Supreme Apex Korthok found his authority challenged for the first time in his 1,000-year reign. Military commanders who had served the Empire faithfully for centuries began to suggest that perhaps the human conflict was too costly to continue. Civilian populations on Zephyrian worlds began to demand explanations for why their sons and daughters were dying in a war that seemed to have no end. The breaking point came during the siege of Terra Prime itself. The final gambit, General Vasquez, had always known that the war would ultimately be decided at Earth. The Zephyrian Empire could not tolerate the continued existence of a species that had successfully resisted their conquest. Eventually, they would commit everything they had to destroying humanity's homeworld. When long-range sensors detected the approach of the largest Zephyrian fleet ever assembled, Vasquez implemented the final phase of humanity's defense strategy. Every human world in the galaxy received the same message. Operation Last Stand is now in effect. All colonial assets are to be consolidated for the defense of Terra Prime. This is not a request. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human ships from across the galaxy began converging on the Sol system, carrying not just military assets, but the entire accumulated resources of human civilization. Cargo haulers became weapons platforms. Civilian transports became troop carriers. Mining ships became improvised warships, armed with industrial equipment converted to military use. More importantly, every human colony contributed their best and brightest to the defense effort. Scientists, engineers, tacticians, and warriors from 300 worlds brought with them knowledge and experience that had been gained through 2 years of constant warfare against the Empire. Ambassador Lynn Torres, a former diplomat who had become humanity's chief negotiator, made one final attempt to find a peaceful solution. She transmitted a message directly to Supreme Apex Korthok, offering a negotiated settlement that would allow both species to coexist without further conflict. Response was transmitted throughout the galaxy. Humans are prey. Predators do not negotiate with prey. You will submit or you will be consumed. Torres smiled as she received the message. She had not expected acceptance, but she had needed to make the offer for what came next. The Deathworld's children, the battle of Terra Prime began with the largest space engagement in galactic history. More than 10,000 ships clashed in the space around Earth's moon, with both sides employing weapons and tactics that had never been used before. The Zephyrian fleet had overwhelming superiority in individual ship capabilities, but the humans had learned to fight as a coordinated whole, using swarm tactics and coordinated strikes to neutralize enemy advantages. But the real shock came when the Zephorians attempted to land on Earth itself. The planet that Zephorian archives had classified as a death world proved to be exactly that, but not in the way the Empire had expected. Earth was not dangerous because of its environment or its native life forms. Earth was dangerous because of what it had produced. Humans who had been shaped by millions of years of survival on a world that had tried to kill them at every opportunity. Every human on Earth, from children to elderly civilians, had been trained in defensive tactics. The planet's entire population of 8 billion people became a single coordinated resistance force. Cities became fortresses. Wilderness areas became killing grounds. Even the planet's weather seemed to turn against the invaders as human weather control systems created storms and environmental hazards that disrupted Zephyrian operations. Warmatron Velrus, leading the ground assault personally, found herself fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Human resistance fighters would appear without warning, strike with devastating effectiveness, and then vanish into terrain that they knew better than any off-world invader could hope. To learn, worse, The humans were using psychological warfare on a scale that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Every Zephyrian communication channel carried human propaganda designed to demoralize and confuse enemy forces. The messages were simple but effective. You are fighting the children of a death world. We have survived everything our planet could. Throw at us what makes you think you're worse than an ice age. The new galaxy. The war ended not with a great battle or a dramatic surrender, but with a simple realization. Supreme Apex Korthok, monitoring the battle reports from his throne world, finally understood what his empire was truly fighting. The humans were not prey. They had never been prey. They were predators, just like the Zephyrians, but they had evolved on a world so dangerous that they had been forced to become something the Empire had never encountered. Cooperative predators who grew stronger when threatened. Every Zephyrian victory over the humans had taught them something new. Every defeat had made them more dangerous. Every casualty had been shared with their entire species, creating a collective learning experience that made humanity as a whole more effective at fighting the Empire. Most importantly, the humans had demonstrated something that Zephyrian civilization had never learned. They could win by making victory too costly for their enemies to achieve. Korthok's final transmission to his fleet was brief: withdraw from all human systems. The Empire recognizes human territorial claims. The formal peace treaty was signed 6 months later on neutral ground provided by the Altarian survivors. Ambassador Torres, representing humanity, and Supreme Apex Korthok, representing the Empire, agreed to a set of principles that would reshape galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Empire would no longer engage in wars of conquest. Human space would remain human space. Both species would share technological and military intelligence with other civilizations to prevent future predator-prey relationships from developing. Most importantly, the treaty established the principle that no species had the right to exterminate another, regardless of technological or military superiority. General Basquez, watching the treaty ceremony from her headquarters, allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had not just survived its first encounter with a hostile alien empire, they had changed the fundamental rules of galactic civilization. The age of apex predators was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and it had all started because a group of miners on New Geneva had refused to run when 12-foot-tall aliens told them they were prey. The galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk.